interview is the same as the initial one. We're going to allow an opening statement. Then we'll go through the questions, and then we'll close with either a statement by you or if you have any questions from us. First, I'll introduce the school committee members. Okay.
Yes.
So Peter Gates.
Hey, Bill.
Hi, Peter.
Nicole Brandolini.
Hi.
Oh.
Mike Hayes.
Hey, Bill. How are you tonight?
Hi, Mike.
And Mike Long.
Hey, Bill. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Mike. Likewise. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to let you go ahead and make an opening statement.
Sure. Thank you. It's an honor to be here tonight. I first want to thank the search committee. And I know there was a lot of time and effort and meetings that went into this and the process. And even though we weren't live, the questions that were asked told me a lot about what the search committee wanted from a candidate. So I really appreciate that. I also want to give a shout out to Mr. Hardy from MASC. It's been very smooth process. The communication's been excellent. Obviously unique circumstances, but he's been on top of things, and I've been prepared each time. So I want to give him a shout out. And then obviously thank you all for giving me this chance to be here tonight. So my opening statement, basically, I narrowed it down to 3 reasons why I think I'd be a great fit and the right person for the Scituate superintendency. The first one is, the opportunities. There's just so many exciting things happening in Scituate. Hiring a new superintendent, hiring a new principal at the high school, state-of-the-art middle school attached to the high school, endless opportunities there. New building, new fields master plan happening as we speak. Very impressive. And the potential and hopefully likelihood of a new elementary school. One of those things in and of itself would be an exciting opportunity for a new superintendent. I think having them all together provides a great opportunity for someone to come in and see those projects through, and all things that I think I have personal experience with. So that was, exciting to me. The second thing is my experiences. Although I don't check all the traditional boxes of a superintendent, I have been preparing for this position for many years. And I've been fortunate over the last 6 to be mentored by a superintendent who is extremely bright, a visionary, a trendsetter, and someone who's taken me under their wing and taught me the ropes, basically, and allowed me the opportunities to take part in budgeting opportunities, negotiations, legal issues, personnel matters, you name it. He's given me the opportunity to do that. Not to mention we're a smaller school district, and I'm the senior administrator in the district, being there 6 years. The district is 6 years old. Superintendent's been there a year longer than me. We have a cabinet that includes all the principals, and we're very involved in decision-making for the district. So I'm very fortunate to be in that situation and to learn. And the last one is fit. The first thing I did, is research the district. I want to go to a place that wants me to be their superintendent. I also want to go to a place where I want to be and be there for a long time. This will be my first superintendency. I'd like it to be my last. I mean, in an ideal world. And so I did some research. I obviously, living in Plymouth, knew a lot about Scituate. I had been there before, mostly for athletic contests at the fields. But I was extremely impressed with what I saw. And I started off by watching a lot of school committee meetings. Because the first thing, quite honestly, I wanted to know what my future bosses were like. And I watched several school committee meetings, and it was kind of funny because my adult children are home. One's online learning and one's working, and they're watching Netflix, and I'm over in the corner with my computer for 3.5 hours, and they're saying, "Dad, what are you watching? What are you doing?" And I'm saying, "I'm watching Scituate school committee meetings." Of course, they just laughed at me, and they didn't even ask why. They just, okay, it's Dad being Dad. So, but what I really learned from that is, a lot of what's happening in the district. I feel, especially under the circumstances with the coronavirus, but also the short time, the turnover from a new superintendent to come in, there's no time to learn the job. You got to be prepared to come in and get the job done. And so I spent a lot of time researching this. I had a good grasp from watching those meetings on what's happening. And I also learned a lot about how you all interact. And I was very impressed with your collegiality, your respect, your professionalism, and your passion for the school district. So I said, I can hit it off great with this school committee, And so that was enticing to me. And then finally, part of my research, I think our vision and values are aligned very similarly. And the point I'll use is the whole "we are crew" concept. And the first thing that's in your core values is building relationships. And it talks about mutual trust and respect for all. I think we take these for granted now in education. And I think by having them front and foremost in your core values, and the whole concept of "we are crew" aligns very much to what we're doing in Monomoy with home away from home. That was really attractive to me. And I'll end with some of the tasks that my superintendent gave me when I came into the position of a brand new regionalized high school, 2 small towns coming together under one new roof, a lot of responsibility, a lot at stake. The superintendent hired me, and he wanted me to do a few things and do them well. And I'll never forget that. And I think we've delivered on those. And that was, first of all, to build a strong school culture. I think it's the foundation of all great schools to have a strong school culture and climate. And that's how you do things on a day-to-day basis and what your beliefs and core values are. And we've established those in Monomoy and do it very well. And the next thing was to bring a rigorous instructional and curriculum program and opportunities for our kids. With the 2 smaller schools, there weren't a lot of opportunities. There weren't many AP offerings. Cape Cod is an extremely competitive school choice. Over the bridge, it's wild west of school choice. And we were getting hit hard before we regionalized with losing kids to Nauset, Sturgis, you name it. There's a lot of great schools down there. And we mitigated that by bringing in a lot of opportunities in our AP, but also opportunities for all kids. We send kids to the best colleges now. We have strong curriculum, and we have internship programs, global studies, you name it. For a small high school, we can compete with pretty much any suburban school in the state. And so I'm very proud of that. And that was one of his directives to me. And the last one was opportunities for all kids. And again, this aligns with your strategic plan and core values, and something that interested me is that we're preparing kids not just for college, but for life. So character, integrity are really important to us. We teach it, we talk about it every day, sportsmanship, respect for each other. So that's a big part of what we do. And at the same time, we've brought the opportunities up for all kids to join clubs and activities. Sports are big, the arts are big at our school. And that was all built from scratch. And I think it's an impressive thing that we all did. Certainly one person couldn't do, I was just part of it. So I think there's a lot of similarities in what needs to happen in Scituate with all these projects opening it up, and my ability and experience with doing that in Monomoy. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
You.
Mike Hayes is the first question.
Thank you. Bill, my opinion, most superior school systems have superior choral, instrument, and art as a major part of their curriculum. Do you agree with that statement? And in Scituate, especially in its middle and high schools, we do have superior choral, instrument, and the arts programs. How will you support the arts and make it grow in the Scituate school system?
Thank you. That's a great question. And 100% I do. And we have an outstanding Visual and Performing Arts Center at Monomoy, a program, excuse me. Well, it starts, first of all, with a commitment to it. And I think a lot of that comes with your vision and values. We have graduation requirements for the visual and performing arts. So you have to put your money where your mouth is. So if it's that important to us, it should be a graduation requirement. So we have that. We also have opened up our opportunities to the middle school. We send our high school kids down, similar to what you may see in sports, where they invite the youth kids up to see the big game and get excited about the high school. We send our music students down to the middle school and mentor our 5th, 6th, and 7th graders so that they'll be excited to come up and join our program. I think per person for our music program, we have the most students on Cape Cod going to states, and the most kids per capita of students that participate in our music and arts programs. So for a smaller school, we value that. And I think lastly, it's also a budgetary. I'm a firm believer that your value system is reflected in your budget. So each year when the budgets get a little tight, my fine arts and performing arts folks will come to me and say, is our budget still there for the drama production? Are we still there? Are we cutting teachers? And I say absolutely not. It's the focal point of our school. It's the highlight of a lot of kids' lives. So we protect that in our budget, and we've only strengthened it and added resources and money to that. And I would do the same at Scituate. I would support it 100%. You do so budgetarily, but you also do it philosophically in your program of studies and what you offer kids and how you recruit and allow as many kids as possible to take part of a great opportunity.
That's great. Thank you.
Hi, Bill. The next question is, why are you seeking the superintendency, and how do you see your particular skill set working effectively for us, and why do your skills match our needs?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of that I reflected in my opening statement. This is the only job I'm applying for. I mean, when I researched this school district, I drove to all your schools. I know about the reconfiguration plan. I parked in the parking lot and took notes. And I shared this in the opening interview, and to a point where one of the police officers came up behind me, and I'm just sitting in the empty school, and I forget what school, but I think it might have been Cushing. And I'm taking notes from the car, and there's no one else there. And I look up, and the police officer's behind me. And so I turned around and I said, I'm just doing some preparation for a superintendent opening here. And she smiled, and she said, just want to let you know that, we're not open. So she was very Please know your schools are very well protected, your public service officers are doing a great job. So anyway, flushed me out of there, but I went to all the schools because I know about the reconfiguration plan. I wanted to see the schools for myself. I wanted to see the condition they were in. I wanted to see the neighborhood structures because I know they're neighborhood schools. I wanted to get a feel for that. I had been at the high school before. I hadn't been there and seen the new Gate School. So I went there, and outside obviously could see it. I love the idea of having the high school and middle school connected. I think there's a lot of things we can do there. We're doing them with the 8 through 12 configuration we have in Monomoy. So I really like that. And I just went around and drove around town, and I just really liked the feel of the town. So I said, this is someplace, and I've never said this in an interview, that I'd like to eventually come and live. Living in Plymouth, we're not too far away, but that's the type of place I found it. I found it very comfortable, very welcoming, very warm. And so those are some of the things in my research that brought me towards it. But also, I thought the strategic plan was very strong. I thought the support of the town through the budget over the years, it's averaged about 3%, I noticed, which is pretty strong. The per pupil cost of the schools is kind of right in the middle of schools similar to yours in Scituate. So I thought that we could work certainly with that. And the staff that you have at the schools has an unbelievable reputation outside of Scituate. I will tell you that. So for a superintendent to come in and to be able to lead a great staff already in place, that made it easy for me. So for all those things, and probably a lot more I could go on, I'm extremely attracted to this position.
Well, thank you. We definitely do have an exemplary staff for sure. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, I guess I'm up. But Bill, as you mentioned in the previous question, your intro kind of already answered a lot of the questions that I was going to ask you. So I'm going to try to keep the form here. But I know you've had several challenging situations in your past roles, probably both at your current position as well as you were in New Bedford.
Correct.
So after resolving these challenging situations, what strategies did you use to heal any relationships that may have been strained?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And I think, my personal belief is everything starts with relationships. Everything starts with building trust. And I think you do that with everyone. And I mentioned this in my entry plan, that the first thing I did at Monomoy, the first thing I did at Normandan and New Bedford was I went out and met people. And I just had a coffee with them. I'd go to their houses. I'd go to the church. I'd go to the synagogue. I'd go to the town. I'd go to the games. I was everywhere. And I just took my notebook and I took notes and I listened. And a lot of trends would start to set. And so people got to know me. And I think, for example, in Normandan, when I went there, it was a culture in chaos. There was a huge discipline problem. There were assaults on teachers. It was my first principalship. I was nervous, excited. And I went in there, and the first thing I did was I went out and met people. I knocked on the door of every neighbor around the school, and I introduced myself. And I said, "What can you tell me about our kids and what I need to know, and how can I help support them?" And they were just very appreciative of that. So that's one example. And when you build those relationships, I think when they become strained, it's a lot easier to heal those. So the example at Monomoy I could give was that I have a very strong connection with our staff. We have very good relationships. But now here comes a contract negotiation and things get tough and things get a little hairy. And one of the sticking points was a program that we all respect and love at our school with the Sharks. So it's the Jossam Hour. It's an enrichment opportunity during the lunch hour that hopefully I'll get a chance to talk about later. And that kind of was being negotiated and was the sticking point of the breakdown in the contract negotiations. It was an opportunity for me to just go one-on-one with our staff, have staff meetings, and make myself available with those trusting relationships I had and just be candid with them. Hear their concerns. I think people want to be heard. When they're hurting, when they're stressed, when there's a disconnect, it's better to shut your mouth and listen and then respond than it is to go out demanding, especially if you are the leader of a school or a district. So I take that approach. I went out, I was a listener. I took the information back. I worked with the superintendent. I helped mitigate that, that hurt that was going on. We resolved the contract. And in the next year, there was still a little bit of that lingering stress, you know, and we just addressed it head on. We just talked about it. And we became a cohesive team again. So I think, to reiterate, I think it's going out, building those relationships and trust up front. Actions should match your words, getting to know people. And then once things do get tough, which they eventually do, and if there are relationship strains, is sitting down with those people face to face. Don't do it through emails. I like sitting down with people, and I find that it's way better to resolve issues like that one-on-one.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bill, I have the next question, and it fits pretty well in the answer that you just gave. So in your first year as superintendent, you would be responsible for completing contract negotiations with all 6 of our unions. What would be your approach to the contract negotiation? Well, I'm sorry, what has been your approach to contract negotiations throughout your career? And how will that define your approach if you become superintendent in Scituate?
Great, thank you. So I think, agreed that the first thing is building those relationships up front. But also when you're negotiating contract, you know, you have to do your homework. You know, ultimately, it's going to come down to taxpayers' dollars. So I think doing the homework on what you can afford, what your bottom line is, what your sticking point is, and your non-negotiables are, I think you have to stand by them and have your core values backed up there. So I can sleep at night knowing when I go into negotiations that this is our bottom line. We've done our homework. We know what we can afford. We know what's reasonable, and we know what's best for kids. And it always goes back to me, even when we're talking about the adults and the contracts, is this best for kids? And I also believe in compromise. And I'm a realist too. When we sit down at the table, the best negotiation sometimes is when you leave and both sides feel a little stung. And that may happen. And I think best example I can have is when my superintendent, after our teachers' negotiations, we had the custodial negotiations. And my superintendent let me run those. He says, you're going to be a superintendent, you need to run these. We sat down, we looked at the numbers, we got a feel for what the custodians were looking for and what we could offer them. And we sat down. And I'll tell you right now that I knew everybody in the room. I knew about their families. I knew who they were because they worked in the district. I worked in the district. I took the time to get to know them. So when you come into a typically tense situation and you come in and say, hey, Joe, how's your daughter doing at Princeton? Or how, Susie, how's your husband doing in his new job? It just breaks down that tension, and then you start talking brass tacks. And I think that trust is there. But I also think you have to have the human side when I negotiate contracts. One example in that custodial contract was they wanted to work a day shift instead of Christmas Eve. We had them working the Christmas Eve night. And they wanted to work, but they wanted to all go in the day. That's a no-brainer. I mean, that's low-hanging fruit. That was one of the things we were able to provide them, and they were appreciative of that. So I think it's that respect to the hardworking people in your district, fairness, equity, but also able to justify when you take a stand and say, no, we just can't do this. We can't go below X percent. We just can't afford it. Or no, we can't do this. It's not best for kids. It's best for the adults. And you justify that by doing your homework. The negotiations have worked out very well for us.
Great. Thank you.
Welcome.
Hey, Bill, I have the next question. Not all students choose college after graduation. What programs would you develop for those students that would help them be successful after high school?
That's a great question and one I'm very passionate about. Not only do not all students go to college, or desire to go to college, not all students can afford college. So my belief on that is that we have to start with a backwards design in the New England Association of Schools Committees, NEAF, of which a lot of us get evaluated on, and we recently did, has a nice set of research-based standards. And one of those standards talks about the vision of the graduate. Collectively, with our staff, we sat down and said, when a student graduates from Monomoy Regional High School or our district, what skills should they have? Should every single kid have when they leave here so that they are hireable, employable, have high integrity and character, and represent our school district well? And so by taking all those skills in mind and incorporating them into the curriculum, that you provide those kids the opportunities when they leave there to be employable, to go into the military, or to choose college. Now, that being said, at the high school, we don't want to wait till they get to college. And we've created an innovative culture at our school where we've got a lot of smart people. Teachers are very bright, and a lot of them are smarter than me. And so my job as principal and superintendent, and what the culture we've created, is find ways to say yes. So I've got a culture where teachers would come up to me with ideas about curriculum, ideas about programming, and when you sit down with them, you try to find ways to say yes instead of no, and it comes from them, and it's organic. They're willing to do above and beyond and run with that. And a couple examples I can give you that connect back with the question, or how are we preparing these kids for real life, is we have a very successful internship program. It started with 4 kids. It was a teacher's idea. Let's get them out working, get them out experiencing the job force. And now over half of our senior class does it. And ultimately, we'd like to see our whole senior class do it. And it's also connected us with the community with over 30 community memberships. And we have a breakfast at the beginning where our community comes into the school. We celebrate those community groups. It really brings the community around the school and makes the school the nucleus. It allows our students to go out and get professional experiences. They love it. It's one of the best things we've done. The other example is something that the state is doing is innovative pathways. And I'm very interested in that. And that's something that I'd like to look into for Scituate if I were to come, or at Monomoy, is when you're connecting, and some schools are piloting this right now, it's where you're connecting with local businesses. And basically you have a think tank of local business people come together, they meet with the school, and you sit down and you talk about skills that are relevant now and what they need in the workforce. Then you partner up with those community groups and businesses, and you start implementing that into your curriculum for your kids so it's applicable and it's authentic, and you can combine that with the internship program. It makes it more powerful so that our kids now aren't waiting till after school to get these skills. They're actually getting hands-on skills during school. So those are some ideas that I think I would look to see implemented, or my vision anyways, to see where future of education is going. Because I also see that the vocational schools are getting a lot of kids from the public schools, quite honestly, because they're offering things like carpentry and plumbing and things like that. And I think we have to really reconsider that in public schools and make those opportunities available for our kids.
Okay, great, thank you.
Bill, Scituate has always been very concerned with and has invested in doing whatever we can for the emotional well-being of our students and their families. Can you give me some feedback on what you've worked on in that regard that's been good?
Sure. Well, that's part of our home away from home philosophy. It's all about family connections, communications, opportunities for families to be connected with school, and to make sure that no child falls through the cracks. I think the first way you do that is by reaching out to the families proactively. Now, we know not all families want to come to the school or are comfortable doing so. So we have to go meet them where they are. And I think the best way to do that is through their children. So we have a lot of programs in our school where we'll proactively go out and communicate with parents and the kids. And part of our baseline philosophy is treat every child like they are your own. Whether you have kids or not, high expectations, support, challenge them, and loving them. And I think our teachers have bought into that and embraced that. I know our administrators have as well. And so by doing that and having that, we reach out to the parents regularly. So for example, we have a process in our school where if someone's not doing well or falling through the cracks, they get referred to a student support team. Our student support team is made up of administrators, counselors, and we get that information, and right away we contact home and start talking to the parents. We invite the parents in for meetings. We talk to them about how we can partner with them proactively with their children, and I think that goes a long way. I also personally, as the principal, and I would do this as superintendent, speak regularly with our students and their parents. I have opportunities regularly for coffees with a principal, stop in anytime, and a lot of parents take advantage of that. I think if you walk the walk, and if a parent asks to meet with you, and you go out and meet with them right away, and you don't hide behind your desk, word gets out that you're accessible. I have an agreement with my families and parents at home that 24-hour rule, I will get back to all correspondence within 24 hours. And again, I like to talk to people in person or over the phone. We'll email if that's more comfortable from the parents, but a lot of time I'll directly reach out to parents and students just to check up on them. I have a list every day of students' parents I call. I also have principalgrams that I write every day to students and to staff and to families about how proud I am of their kids. And we did that one year with all of our teachers where they wrote personal notes to their kids and to their families. And I think the best thing we can do to bring families together is to reach out to them where they're comfortable, but do it instead of having family nights or open houses. I think that's cliche, we do it, of course, but not everybody goes. We have to find the parents that don't show up, and we have to reach out to them, even if it means home visits. I remember in Normandin in New Bedford, the first thing I did was found out the 10 kids that weren't coming to school or were having anxiety about school. I called their parents and asked if I could do a home visit with our social worker, if they'd allow me in their home to just come and meet them and meet their child before they came here, and I was the new principal. 100% of them said yes. I spent that whole summer conducting informal home visits just to get to know the families. And it was unbelievable, the response. I had the best meals prepared. They were excited to see me. And just to play this forward and how important that is, you build that trust for families that don't necessarily trust schools or know much about schools, and they're comfortable in their own homes. So I'm not beyond doing that. Fast forward, one of the parents I went and met that summer, we had a contentious IEP meeting. Advocates in the room, lawyers. I mean, the room was filled with about 20 people. And I knew the parent. It was one of the parents that had welcomed me in their home, fed me, took care of me. And when they came in, she gave me a big hug. She was just so appreciative of it. And it just broke the ice of the whole meeting. The meeting was productive because she knew we cared about her child and her family. And I'll end with this. During this current, and why these relationships are so important, and I love the question, is that in times like this, where we don't have access to the kids, any of our kids, personal relationships with their teachers, with their administrators, with the staff are incredibly important, because not everybody has a supporting home. And even if they do, the kids need to know that we care about them. So one of the things we're doing now, and one non-negotiable we have in connecting with our remote learning, is that every day, every kid will have a face-to-face with a teacher, a staff member, or administrator. And so we're playing that out, and that's, among other things, that's one thing that's mandated and something that we all love, that we're going to connect face-to-face with our kids. So the whole family aspect, it just goes with our philosophy of home away from home. I think it aligns nicely with We Are Crew, building relationships. You have to think outside the box. Let's get away from thinking, okay, they're going to come to us, because they're not all going to come to you. We need to think about how are we going to go to them where they're at.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill, so can you tell us about your experience with hiring teachers and other school personnel? And what are some of the ways that you've raised the confidence of those people that you've worked with?
Great. It's an awesome question. It's one of the most important responsibilities. Research will show that the teacher in the classroom has the highest impact on student learning. Therefore, the most important job of the principal and the superintendent is to hire great people and keep them. So stage one first. How do you get the best people? Well, you have great school systems. How do you get great school systems? Well, you have great teachers. So it's a kind of that circle. Mm-hmm. In Monomoy, we started out from scratch. So we didn't have that reputation of a great school district yet. We were new. People were taking chances there. So what we did right away is we raised the bar and said, we are going to have a very stringent and challenging vetting process for our teachers. And we also, part two of that is we wanted the opportunity for our teachers and students to have a voice in who we hire. We thought that was very important, that the teachers didn't, or students and families didn't perceive that this was a backdoor deal, or this was the principal just hiring a friend, or it's a bag job. We ruled all that out. We are a community, and that process was started with the teachers in mind and the students. So we sat down together and we said, okay, how do we accomplish a couple of things? How do we attract the best teachers, and how do we keep them? And how do we vet them? So, for example, and we collectively came up with this answer. Our process involves people applying. Obviously, we post the job, they apply. Administrator and a department head will sit down, so a teacher member in our school will sit down and vet those applications. Then we'll screen them out, and I always like to have more than less, because sometimes a resume might not speak to what a person does when you talk to them. So if we have a couple that are on the cusp, we'll bring them in. Why not? And then we'll have a committee together, and every teacher has the option to be on that screening committee. And we find that a lot of teachers commit to that. They want to be part of making the decision who their next colleague is. We invite students to be part of that process. Then we have an interview. After that, the cream rises to the top. We have a consensus. They move into the next level. And one thing I don't think we do good enough, or we didn't think we did good enough in education, is we don't actually witness people do their job as part of the interview process. Now, it's harder over the summer. It can be replicated, but we bring those teachers back and have them teach a class. And they teach the same class. And again, teachers are welcome to come in. We have a rubric, and administrators are there, so it's high pressure. You've got about 6 people in the room. It's like me teaching a lesson with all you in there. That's intimidating to me. So they're in there, and our whole philosophy is you can teach a class of kids you don't even know with a group of adults that you don't even know, your potential bosses in the background with pens and clipboards. You can do it anywhere. So we want that pressure. So they come in, they teach the class. We get the teacher feedback and rubric, and we get the student feedback and rubric. And you know what? 100% of the times it makes my life easy, because when I compare those two rubrics, it's 1 to 4, 4 being the highest. Those kids, and this is high school, middle school could do it, and you could have a form of it in elementary as well, where, because I'm a big believer in student voice, where the students and the faculty each rated the top candidates 4s across the board. It made it easier. And part 2 of that is, how do we keep those teachers there, is when I meet with them and do my last round, because there's one more, we're going to have it now. I can start looking at their resume and how they taught, and I can ask more detailed questions one-on-one. The first thing I do to make them feel good when we hire them is I show them that rubric. I show, look at this. Look what our teachers and kids thought about you. They thought you were exemplary. Just to see their eyes light up, because and part of that day when they do come in and teach, we also have them have lunch with our teachers, because it's important that they know socially, if this is going to be a good fit. Do I want to be here? Because we want those great teachers to want to be there. We want to show off our great school. And then they take them on a tour so they see our school in session. And we found that we've been able to retain people that way, because they really want to be in our school, and they've had a chance to see it in session. They've got a chance to teach the lesson. They've been vetted thoroughly. So I think that process has allowed us to, and Cape Cod helps, by the way, to attract people from all over the country. We just brought people in from Virginia, Washington. We've got people applying and coming down and moving to the Cape to teach at our school. And now we've got a great reputation. And I think a lot of it had to do with including students and teachers in the process of hiring our staff. And now when a new staff member walks in that door, everybody's already excited to see them there, because they were part of the process. They're not some stranger that the superintendent and principal hired. They're part of the family already. And so I think that is a big reason why we have attracted some great teachers and kept them.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
All right, Bill, I got the next question for you. I'm going to change it a little bit up, because as I mentioned previously, you already answered it in your intro. So thank you, I guess. So formerly, you have not been a superintendent. So going from the principal role to the superintendent role, what do you anticipate to be your greatest challenge in transitioning?
Sure. I think like any job, you just haven't done it yet. So there's going to be hurdles you have that no matter how much practice you've had in another role, you haven't done it. And I think that would be the same for an assistant superintendent. I know when I was an assistant principal and became a principal, I thought I spent so much time with the principal and so was so well prepared when I took over the manager job. I was ready. I knew it all. I didn't. It was a learning curve for me. What I will tell you is that I'm not afraid to ask for help. I'm a member of the many committees in the MSAA, our local association. I think I'm well respected in the state. I've got a number of people I can call that I have high respect for. I am connected to a lot of superintendents. Even preparation for this job and this interview, I've called a lot of them, and I would do the same thing. So I have a large network. I have a lot of connections, being part of the commissioners committee through the MSAA, also being part of the legislative committee, presenting, being asked to present on numerous professional development opportunities through MSAA. I've built a lot of connections. So I think the honest answer is, I haven't done the job. The other part of that honest answer is, nobody will work harder at achieving and being the best at the job than me. And I just think if you look at my previous jobs, I had no experience as a middle school principal, hardly ever taught in the middle school, and I got the job at Normandan. In my first year, I was rated exemplary by the superintendent, one of only 2 principals in the entire district of 25 to do so. And again, not to toot my own horn, but it was a team effort. I had some great teachers and surrounded myself with people a lot smarter than me. But we turned that school district around, and we did it in 2 quick years. And so I'm a problem solver. I'm a team builder. I surround myself with great people, get them on the bus. So I am very confident that although there will be a short learning curve, I'm very confident that I'll do the job like all the others that I've tried with no experience, and I'll do it at the highest level.
Great, thank you.
Okay, is Mike still here?
Yeah, I'm sorry. For some reason, the Zoom is closing on my screen. So, Bill, I apologize for not being able to see me at the moment. But as you saw, as you came around town, we have a number of neighborhood schools in Scituate, in our community. Those neighborhoods are very proud of their schools. One thing we hear as a school committee is the fact that.
Uh-oh.
Unmute yourself. There you go.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, the Zoom just reset itself. One of the things that we hear as a school committee is the fact that we have, something being taught one way in one school and a different way in another. And while the same curriculum is being taught, the manner in which it is done is something that concerns parents, just to make sure that all kids are getting the same education in our schools. So as our superintendent, what would you do to align our curriculum both horizontally and vertically across the district? And then how would you ensure that our curriculum is audited and aligned with the state and national standards?
Great. It's a great question, and it's an issue in all schools. We're dealing with it now. We addressed it this year, and I think I've got some experience doing that. First of all, I like to simplify things for people, because I think our teachers are doing such great work, and I get overwhelmed with initiative fatigue when we start dropping things down, because we get them from the state, we give them to the teachers, and then we add our own things. And so my philosophy on curriculum alignment and making things consistent is priority, clarity, and simplicity. So that's the first phase. So what does that mean? So what do we prioritize? What's our strategic plan ask for? What's the state standards? What are our expectations for the curriculum? Okay, so we prioritize that, and we do it collaboratively. So my idea would be to get representatives from all, for example, in this case, elementary schools together to talk about what's our priority. What are the standards the state's asking for? And then the next thing is to develop a viable and guaranteed curriculum that's consistent among all schools. And what do I mean by that? First of all, viability of a curriculum is the actual days you have to teach the curriculum the state wants you to teach. Now, the simple answer would be 180 days. But when we start looking at field trips and we start looking at assemblies and other things that might disrupt school, it's a lot less than 180. And I think what sometimes teachers do is they build a curriculum based on 180 when they only actually have 150 or 160. So I think that's viable. You do that work together, and then that forces you to prioritize the standards. And again, collaboratively working with members from each of the schools, doing that work. And then the guaranteed curriculum is the part you spoke of there, Mike, is is it taught in the classroom? The written document is what's taught in the classroom. So I'll finish up with the clarity and simplicity. So the clarity means when we come up with that curriculum and we work on it together, how are we able to roll that out and articulate that to all our staff? And I think there has to be, and sometimes we miss this opportunity, is there has to be appropriate professional development time so that our teachers are prepared and have a clear message on what those expectations are. And they're not overloaded with a curriculum dumped on their desk the summer before. They're given time to look at it, work together with their colleagues to roll it out. So now we've got a curriculum that's developed by colleagues across schools. It's viable, it's guaranteed. And now we move on to the clarity part. It's clearly articulated. We know what's expected of us. We're given the time to prepare. And the last thing is simplicity. What's our focus this year from this new curriculum? For example, this year we focused on literacy at our school across all content areas. And then we aligned our PD to do that. And then finally, me as superintendent or the principal, how do we know what's really happening in the classroom? Okay, we've got this nice document where the 4 elementary schools have worked together to align it. It's viable, it's guaranteed, it's ready to go. We've had time to prepare for it. What's to stop them from closing the door and doing their own thing? Well, that's when evaluations come into effect and expectations. We actually created a document at our school called Great Teaching at Monomoy Regional High School. This was developed in collaboration with our teachers and our administrators, and I would do the same, or I would offer to do the same if superintendent there. Meaning we get together as a staff and administrators and we look at research best practices in teaching. And there's a handful. It hasn't changed a lot since the 60s and 70s. What core strong instruction is. And so I think what we teach in the classroom has to be defined for our teachers. Just like the curriculum, we need to define what great teaching is in our classrooms in Scituate. And an example of that document would be a clearly articulated objective in every classroom. Next would be a hook. What are you going to do to start the class to get the kids interested? The next thing would be the actual new teaching. And that's not the whole block, that's just a certain section of the block. And then it's, okay, guided practice for the students, giving them time to digest this new information while the teacher goes around checking for understanding. And then after that process plays out, the teacher has enough information to see if the kids understand it or not, and then can reteach the information if they didn't get it, or move on to new information. So that structure right there is what we came up in Monomoy, very simple, very clear, and very focused. Now, and we aligned that to the very messy and big and cumbersome state standards. We aligned that rubric with those simple strategies that I told you that we all agreed on. And now when the administrators walk in the classroom, we should be seeing those things in all of our classroom. And we are. So it's up to us as administrators to set the systems and structures up to make it simple, clear, and prioritized to our teachers and give them the time and opportunity to prepare and be ready for this. And then the expectation is that they follow through as professionals.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, Bill, I have the next question. Having done research on Scituate Public Schools, would you develop your own 5-year plan, or would you build off what we have, and why?
I would never develop my own anything. You know, I pride myself on being a team player. I pride myself on surrounding the old coach in me. I surround myself with a lot of bright people, and I think you move the ball forward if everyone has a horse in the race, so to speak. So I think I would come in. I already love the foundations of what you have there. I think the strategic plan is strong and well done, and it had a lot of the stakeholders' input, so I value that. So my goal would be to come in and learn more about it, talk to the stakeholders about why they came up with this, where we are in the strategic plan, what the hopes and dreams are of our school. And I often have the conversation, and how I put it in context is, what will make Scituate School District in your particular school or your particular classroom the best in the state of Massachusetts, then in the best in the country, and then dare we say the best in the world? Why aren't we asking that? Why and how can Scituate be the best in the world? And so by answering those questions, looking at our strategic plan, I want to sit down with everybody and get their input through that listening tour, my entry plan. I'll have a good idea. Trends will start to appear, and I'll find through that and through talking to parents and students, then sit down and learn about the school committee's goals and hopes to be the best school district in the state, country, and world. and what we have to do to get there, then my job would be to start initiating the wheels in motion to make that happen. But it has to be a unified decision. It has to be consensus. There has to be voice. And I think that's been the success in my leadership style, is that I get people on board. I get them motivated to contribute because they have a voice. They have a stake in the game. And when things, I think the best leaders step back and let those people that did all the work and had the bright ideas celebrate the successes that we have.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Great. So I'm up again. We have a number of very dedicated teachers and curriculum leaders who over the years have gone after grant money, and we have been especially fortunate in the last number of years to get big grants for to assist in our K-12 physical health and welfare of our kids, adaptive phys ed for our SPED kids. So, and it's worked very well. Can you give me your ideas on that and for the physical health of our kids while they're in school, and including high school and athletics?
Mike, can I just ask for some clarification, please? Is it about grants, or was that just part of the question? Are you asking?
That was just part of the question. I'm curious as to what you've worked on as far as promoting the physical health of kids from pre-K to 12.
Thank you. Well, excellent. As a former wellness teacher and athlete, a collegiate athlete and coach, I hold wellness in high regard. Social emotional, which was another topic I'm sure we'll get to, but at Springfield College, where I attended, it was spirit, mind, and body. And I'm still a firm believer in that, in developing the whole child. But like we talked about earlier, the fine arts programs and a well-rounded education is important to all kids to have experience, as is wellness and health. And I think it starts, and those are usually the first programs cut, quite honestly, in my experiences. That's something I defend and guard, because I think it should be happening all the way from our preschool kids all the way up to learning how to build healthy relationships in that wellness manner, to the physical fitness and opportunities to get involved in their own personal fitness in life. And so I think having a strong wellness program at the elementary, middle, and high schools is important. Supplementing that with not only athletics, which are vital, and a lot of kids thrive in that endeavor and learn a lot of leadership skills and camaraderie and teamwork and sports, but also clubs and activities for those kids that might not be able to play sports. I know recently you started the Unified Athletics. We had that last year. Wow, it was awesome to have our kids working together and to expand that from our track and hopefully onto other athletics. So by providing those opportunities K through 12, it has to come from the top. It has to be the personal vision and belief of the superintendent, and it is my personal background that we all do that. In fact, now that we're on remote learning, I had conversations with our wellness department and department head, and we talked about, how are we going to keep these kids fit at home? And let's think worst case scenario, kid can't leave their house, there's nobody home, there's an elementary kid. Let's get a fitness plan together. Let's generalize. Let's put the standards on hold for a second here. Let's deal with real life. Let's get some workouts and some things that these kids can do that they can exercise and stay healthy. So we've rolled that out, and we're proud of that. The other thing we do with our athletics, because, geez, as a former athlete, my heart goes out to these high school kids that lost their spring season. Although technically it's still there, it's less likely to happen every day. Now, we were really concerned about our athletes, so in their training and their ability just to stay connected with their coaches. So what we did is we went out and ordered a very strong research-based workout program that allows kids to work out online with a program using their own bodies, weight, and just having a mat, not having any weights or anything. So it's equitable for all kids. Our coaches meet with our kids still to kind of keep them fired up, and they all now can work out from home. We paid for that so that no kid, if they didn't have the equipment or the weight room, would be at a disadvantage. So we're very proud of that. So those are some of the things that, again, you're going to put your money where your mouth is, but you also have to have that philosophy and belief where you don't cut those programs, that you value them. And as superintendent, You're going to see me running around the new track. You're going to see me working out and training because I think you need to model what you believe in as well.
One of the things I've been very proud of over the years with our high school athletic programs, to a person, our coaches have said, if you want to play for me, you're expected to be a good athlete, but we insist that you be a good person. And you're not going to play for me if you're a good, honest person. So I would assume you would heartily agree with that.
Actually, 100%, and that's my own personal life values is, and I include that in my entry plan as well. And as a coach, I live by that. Be a good person, be a good student, be a good citizen was my personal values, but that was also as a coach, those were my expectations of my student athletes. And just a side point, because I think teachers are coaches and the best ones do those kind of things for kids. And how I mentor our coaches is that same value system. That number one reason, and every year the MIAA does a survey on this, the number one reason kids play sports is for fun. Right? It's not to be a pro. So the best coaches, the Pied Pipers, if you will, that bring the most kids on are typically buy into that. They're there for the value system, for the fun. And as a former track coach and football coach, I would give awards out every week. And I would make sure that I had my roster and that every single kid on that team got some type of award. And I know initially that may say in people's minds, well, everyone gets a trophy philosophy. We won 4 championships back to back. We weren't giving everybody a trophy. They were earning it. But we had to be creative in how we did that. For example, a young sophomore that's 110 pounds, that's on there every day working just as hard as the captain, who may not be as athletically gifted or talented, but he's working just as hard and he's there every day. We'll give him practice player. We'll bring him up in front of the team and acknowledge him. So those are some of the things that we all can do for our kids. And I think this to the global picture of students is if we can't find one way or one great thing about each of our kids, we shouldn't be in this profession. The second thing is the AP kids, the captains of the teams, the MVPs, they're always going to get their awards. How do we find a way to celebrate and acknowledge every single kid in our school? And I would put that on the caveat of growth. As long as they're growing and getting better and improving, we should be rewarding that behavior with feedback and a call home. So those are some of my own personal, I'm very passionate about that. And I agree with you 100% that the great coaches do character first, athletic ability should never be a part of the conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, so could you describe your experience with managing a school budget and how do we ensure that we're fiscally responsible with our resources and transparent in our process and also equitable across all of our schools?
Okay, I'm going to break that down. Can you repeat that one more time? I'm going to write.
Sure.
So
Can you describe your experience with managing a school budget and how do we ensure that we are fiscally responsible with our resources, transparent in our process, and equitable across all of our schools? There's actually more to it.
I just counted this 4, so let me take the first 4 parts.
Yes.
That's okay. So my experience, like I said,
You may answer it in your answer, so then if you do, then I'll just won't even have to ask it.
Thank you. I'll do my best. So, yeah, like I said, we've got a small district. I'm part of the superintendent. I'm the veteran administrator on the superintendent's cabinet. He's been mentoring me for this position, so I've been part of all the behind-the-scenes conversations with the school committee, the subcommittees, finance committees, part of the presentations. So I think I've got a strong experience in that. I'm also behind the scenes. He's very good with the financial part of it and understanding that. But I think what I've learned from him, what I would do as a superintendent of Scituate, is you need to plan ahead. You have to have a 5-year plan. Some schools don't have that. I think because there's a lot of unknowns, but I think there are a lot of knowns that you could put down there. For example, personnel. Usually 75 to 80% of your cost every year. I think that could be a standard. Contracted services could be put down. But I think once you put down the expenses you have and the fixed costs projecting out, and we have to ask the questions as a school committee, superintendent of schools, and the school side, where do we want to see our school in 5 years to make it the best school in Massachusetts state in the country? What do we need to do? What are our value systems? Back to that. and what are they going to cost us? And we look at those big ticket items, and then we break it down over those 5 years so it's not a one-hit cost. And then I also think, so I think the next part was ensuring, what was it?
Fiscal responsibility and then transparency.
Thank you. So the fiscal responsibility part, I look at it as, and I always have, is this is hardworking taxpayers' money, and we should be able to justify every single penny. And when I do my own budget, every year I go back and do zero-based. I go line by line by line, and it's a long process, and some of the administrative team don't like it, and it's arduous. Oh, we do this every year. But it makes us justify, does this align with our school improvement plan, with our strategic plan, and with our budget for this year? If it's not, we get rid of it. Don't just do things because we've already done things. And I think if you look at that yearly building based, and so if I were to be superintendent, I would sit with our principals and I'd go line by line with their budget and have them justify to me, why is this important? Is this best for kids? And does it align with our strategic plan and goals? And so I think that's very important. So the fiscal responsibility part would be, after sitting down and seeing what what the forecast is with the town managers early in the year, looking at our goals after meeting with the school committee, and looking at and I typically like to develop 3 budgets. I know that Scituate's doing 2, a level serviced and a recommended budget. I also like to prepare for the potential of downtimes. So a level funded budget. So the level funded budget would be, all principals bring me if we had the same exact amount of dollars to spend next year, what could we do? And in effect, that turns into cuts because the cost of living goes up, the COLA goes up for our staff. And so we have to make some hard decisions. Hopefully we never get to that, but we have to be prepared for that. The next one is a level service budget, which means you carry forward the services and what makes the school operate and do it at a high level. And that's typically a bump. And that's what I think we're seeing with the 3.8% raise in recommendation initially in Scituate. And then, so I think sticking by that, working closely with your town, going by their guidelines, and when you present it to the community, I think you have to justify every line. And I was watching one of the school committee meetings where someone asked to see line by line. I need to be prepared to do that, and I'll be willing to do that, and I can defend it. Because it always goes back, and I'll finish that part of the question with, what's best for kids? And so if we go to that zero-based budgeting exercise, and every line we're saying, okay, and the second question is, how can we justify this to the taxpayers who inevitably are going to see this? We need to have that answer. So I think you do a lot of that up front. That makes you fiscally responsible and prudent. Having the level funded plan allows you for tough times that we may be seeing this year with the lack of potential state income and local income. I think in the potential of a 1/12 budget looking forward, I think we have to be prepared to make those hard decisions and be transparent. And then the last one is equitable for all schools. I think it goes back to those cabinet meetings, having the principals in the room after they've gone and met with their stakeholders and they've got their budget ready. And we come up and we look at our strategic plan and we look at our vision for what is going to make our district the best in the state, in the country, in the world. And we come up together with a priority list. And I think when you get principals in a room with the superintendent, you have those goals, those conversations, people get less defensive and they realize what the priorities need to be. And I know, for example, in Scituate, it's the math program. That's going to bring stability across all the elementary schools. It's a worthwhile investment. Back to what Mike asked me about, how do we align these curriculums? So instead of saying, okay, we're going to spend $75,000 on a math program, when we go out and talk to the community, it's going to be, we're investing in an aligned math curriculum, highly research-based, that all of our teachers are going to be doing, and it's great for our kids. That's a different selling point. So I think the transparency part means you need to sell that budget, and you have to be honest about it. You can't hide things, and you got to be ethical about it. So I think that's how I will handle the budget process.
Thank you. You did catch everything in my question. Thank you.
Just tell me if I'm talking too much.
Bill, I actually have a follow-up question on the budget. So Scituate currently charges families a number of fees, including for full-day kindergarten, transportation, and athletics. It makes up about $1.5 million of our annual budget. What is your approach toward fees? And from a budget standpoint, how would you approach any attempt to cut down or eliminate the fees that we currently charge?
That's a great question. I'm philosophically totally against fees. I think public education should be free. The taxpayers pay the money, the kids go to the schools. We're fortunate enough in Monomoy where we don't have any fees. We don't have athletic fees. We don't have bus fees. And we've staunchly defended that. And it's come up, and it comes up at every district. You know, and I had 2 kids go through the Plymouth Public Schools where I live, and I was an educator for a long time. And that's one of the things that drove me crazy as a parent, where I'm paying these taxes, and then I'm paying a $100 bus fee. Both my kids had to pay $100 to park their cars at the high school. They started an athletic fee. I'm like, wait a minute, what are my taxes paying for? So I think it's natural for the community to ask, especially the ones that are sending the kids to school, why are we paying fees for all these things? So we have to answer that. The hard part that Scituate's in right now, and that I'd like to come help solve, is how do we get rid of them? So easier said than done, because you're going to take something off the table. So I think that needs to be an educational process for the community, especially those that don't have children in the school, because it might be that we ask for a little bit more money incrementally, and it goes into that 5-year plan and say, okay, if we want to get rid of all of our fees over a 5-year plan, let's work backwards, and which ones do we get rid of on a yearly basis? How much do they cost? And on the other side of it, what do we have to cut back on in the ask? And I think, you know, and you might come up with a question on, do we cut the bus fees this year and do the math program next year? So all those philosophical questions would have to come up at the school side and with the school committee, but I think it's doable. And I think you just have to do it by educating the community on the importance of reducing fees and how it negatively impacts your families, while at the same time offsetting the cost with your budget ask to the town.
Great answer.
Great, thank you.
All right, Bill, again, since you answered my other question, intro, and your other answers, I'm going to switch it up a little bit. A couple of weeks ago, Governor Baker signed into law that all schools were going to be closed until further, well, at least till March 4th. Can you give me the day in the life of Bill Burkhead, the days following that announcement?
I love that question. Great improv. I'm glad I answered some of your questions, because your follow-up ones are probably better. I think that's wonderful. It's been very challenging, very rewarding, very hard, and at the same time emotional. So I will say that I think we were on the back to my superintendent. It was his vision a while back to make our school one-to-one with Chromebooks from 5 through 12. So we had that in place. Didn't anticipate a pandemic necessarily, but anticipated maybe a blizzard, or in Cape Cod we get a lot of, you know, hurricanes, things like that. Extended time out of school. We didn't want to miss a beat with our kids' ability to work from home. So we had the one-to-one experience. So I'll never forget Friday, I think it was the 13th of March, a number of schools were closing down. I felt intense pressure as the principal, because there were rumors going around every day that a friend of a friend or a student might have it, and are we going to close schools? And what I found over that last week was kids weren't focused on learning, teachers weren't focused on learning, they were scared. And so the superintendent brought us in on Saturday, I think it was March 14th, and he says, let's go, I'll buy the pizza, we're going to sit, put our heads together, and as a leadership team, come up with our remote learning plan. We have the computers, how are we going to get them to the elementary kids? How are we going to feed everybody? Let's get going. And at that point, we had planned on coming back to school on Monday. So we hadn't planned for this, but we knew it was coming. So that Saturday, we spent 10, 12 hours together, banging up schedules around, looking at our philosophy, and making sure that every kid would have access to online learning. We also looked at and did a survey, prepared a survey to send home to make sure that every kid had access to Wi-Fi. And if they didn't, we were committed to buying them hotspots so they would. So equity and empathy were on the foremost of our minds, and knowing that this would be a traumatic situation to send kids home. So we developed a plan that we've developed a couple non-negotiables. And the FaceTime with teachers was the big thing. Even if it wasn't academic, they were going to touch base in a Google Meet like this with their class, say hi, tell a joke, have fun, put our kids at ease. And then, I guess that Saturday, I think the governor made the call to close schools. So we were at the meeting when it happened. We rolled this out. We canceled schools for the following week, and we made those our snow days. The next 4 days, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, the leadership team was, axe to the grindstone, coming up with our plan, because again, it's back to that high expectation, and it's back to, we didn't want kids to miss a day of learning. We could be prepared. So we went actually 3 snow days. We asked our staff to come back the last 2, Thursday and Friday of that first week of being out, to do professional development. And we socially distanced. We did it through Google Meets, and we taught them, we already used Google Classroom. We taught them some of the Google Meet technologies and other technologies. We rolled our plan out. We met with the union in that time. We came up with an MOA, happened all very fast. And on the following Monday, our kids were learning while other school districts were still floundering around. I've seen some that are putting this out this week. So we didn't miss a beat. Day in the life was very stressful and scary because of our students and their situations and our staff. And I'll end with this. Now that we're into this, I look at it through a lens as a leader of, in a time of stress and high anxiety like this, is being a strong communicator. We communicate with our staff regularly. Every week I have what's called a Swimming with the Sharks, again, back to our shark theme, where we open it up to our staff to have a Google Meet. It's usually in person. I go right in the teacher's room with our administrative team. We have breakfast. We talk about the school. They share their concerns. I had just about the entire staff show up this Friday. And I just listened. I said, hey, how's it going? How are you? We talked about them personally. And then I asked them, okay, how's it going with this new rollout? What can we do differently? And I also want to give my superintendent credit, because we also rolled out after the first week a survey to our families, our students, and our staff about what our remote learning plan was doing for them. How was it working? How was it not working? And what we could do to change it. We also met face-to-face with our families and our students and gave them opportunity to give feedback. We then met again week 2, reorganized it, and rolled it back out after that input. The survey results showed almost, I think it was 85 to 90% of our families were high approval rating for our rollout. And so that's kind of how it's been a whirlwind. But what I like to do, I think I haven't changed my philosophy. Just so you know what I'm doing now as an administrator, I'm expecting all of our staff, to connect with our students, and that no one falls through the cracks. So any student that doesn't show up over a couple of days, it gets reported to our guidance counselors, who have a spreadsheet that's shared with our administrative team. We look at it, we talk about it every day. If little Joey's been gone 2 days, we're calling his house. Hey, how are you? We're calling him. How are you doing? At the elementaries, call the families. We just want to make sure, and it's from a support perspective, not a hound you, where are you? It's, hey, we miss you, is everything okay? Because we know right now in homes that there's stress, there's people losing jobs, there's people that may be sick. So, and as a leadership team, and I'll end with this, we've divided up our entire staff among the 3 administrators in our building, and each week we contact every single one of them individually, check in on their social emotional well-being, just to ask them, how are you? Is everything okay? And so those real life connections are very important to me and something I value. And I think that's made a strength of keeping our sanity and keeping us moving in a real positive direction through all of this.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Bill, in one of my earlier questions, you gave a really good example of how someone gave you an opportunity to succeed in a role that you don't necessarily do as a high school principal, and being able to run the custodian negotiations. What are your thoughts on delegating authority, and how would you do that coming into a new district?
Well, I'm a big fan of it. It's actually aligns exactly with my leadership style and my personality. And I have a joke, but it's half true, and I tell it with all my staff. It's I try to surround myself with where I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I'm smart enough to surround myself with the smartest people. So what I like to do, I'm really big into hiring. I'm really big into building teams and systems. And I put this in my entry plan. The first thing I want to do is start looking at the systems in place. What leadership styles are there? What meetings take place? Who meets with what? How do we communicate that information? So I think that's very important to me. And then back to my big love for Good to Great and Jim Collins' work, I think getting the right people on the bus means getting the right staff hired, getting the right people that you want working for your district that are going to make it the best district in the state and the world on the bus. And then the next step would be to get them in the right seats. So you might have a great teacher, but they might not be in the right, teaching the right classes. So you need to fix that. You might have an administrator that's an assistant principal maybe that's ready to be a principal, and you have an opening coming up. How are we mentoring that assistant principal to hire within? So I think those are things that are my strength. Those are things where delegation is highly important to me. But part two of that is mentoring. As a superintendent, and as someone that teaches aspiring principals for Bridgewater State, and seeing the opportunity to hire and mentor, you've got a lot of relatively new principals there. I was excited by that. You know, I think I could work with them and support them from my experiences and learn from them at the same time. But I also think they, when you delegate something to somebody, you also want to make sure you support them, you have their back, they trust you, and that you're doing everything you can so that they succeed. So in a nutshell, I'm 100% on board with delegation. I think people thrive when they have ownership and pride in something that's their own, and it's not their boss's. So I'm a strong believer in that, and you'll see in our school district if the next step, and I make that step, is a virtual meetings with folks at Monomoy. I think they'll all tell you that they're all given a lot of responsibilities. They're allowed to have flexibility, but they do have a bottom line, and I do have high expectations, but I also model that and support them.
Great, thank you.
Bill, I have the next question. Describe a difficult situation you were once in, and what did you learn from it? And would you have come to a different conclusion or decision?
Difficult situation I was in. I just want to rephrase
Yeah.
How I handled it, and what was the last part?
Would you have come to a different conclusion or make a different decision?
Okay, thank you. You know, as a principal, you're faced with a lot of decisions every day, and a lot of them are difficult. Obviously, some are higher up in the chain than others. I think probably the most difficult recent one was, you know what, and this might go back into a day in the life question from Peter, is I'm sitting at home at 8 o'clock at night, you know, relaxing. I don't know if I was reading or just doing some correspondence, and I get a call from our resource officer that he's got a call from someone on duty that they went to one of our students' houses, and that there had been a phone threat to that student's life and to our school. You know, so right away I called the superintendent, because, you know, just like I would call you all as school committee members and say, hey, here's the initial information I have. This is what I'm planning on doing about it. Just wanted you in the loop, no surprises. He said, great, thanks for telling me. Let me know what you find out. I was able to talk to the officer that was at the house, and found out that it was a phone call, that this anonymous call to the student said, I know where you live, gave them the real address. And so I know you go to Monomoy High School. I'm going to shoot the place up if you go there tomorrow. I actually also, the empathetic side too, is I called the student's home and made sure that the kid was okay and that the parent was okay after getting that news. And while I'm doing that, I'm formulating a plan on what we need to do. But I wanted all the facts. So I got the officer statement. I was able to talk to the child with parent permission, talk to the parent. And after back and forth conversations, the police were able to determine that it wasn't a valid threat, that it was, you know, we can't be 100%. So that was a difficult part for me. And for ultimately me and the superintendent to decide, do we cancel school? What do we tell people? Well, it's 9 o'clock at night now after making all these phone calls and stuff. And we have to make a decision. And we came to the conclusion based on what the police told us, and we have back to the relationships, we have a very strong memorandum of understanding with our police. We're very candid with them, and they felt that, you know, it was, it didn't have enough merit, but that we'd also need to obviously safeguard our kids. So we made the very difficult decision of opening school that next day. Now, part two of that has me on my computer at 9:30 at night, typing up to the parents what just happened. And in fairness to them, to get them that information that evening so that they can make a decision on whether they wanted to send their child to school that next day. At the same time, I'm crafting that document and sending it to my superintendent for approval to send out. I'm drafting another memo to my staff, a little different, a little more detail, because now they're going to be on the front lines with our kids tomorrow. We have to have the same messaging. and the same information. So I give them a little bit in the memo. I ask to meet with them before school the next morning. We sit down, we talk about it. I answer their concerns, their questions, and we go from there. We ultimately send out an email blast, and already my phone's blowing up off the hook. I get emails off the hook. I spent that whole night to midnight and beyond responding to every single parent and addressing them with as much honesty and transparency as I could about the situation. We also included in that how we were going to protect the building. Okay, and now with police presence and our staff out in the hallways and all that kind of stuff, and they had to trust us. And so that was a very difficult decision. A number of kids stayed home that day. I made the decision afterwards to excuse those absences because I think that's a family decision, and I didn't blame them for doing that, but I also wanted the school to go on. The next day at school, for symbolism and to support my students and staff, I'm out front every day greeting every kid that comes in the building, waving to their families at drop-off. I positioned my desk in the main foyer of the school right in the entryway. And my desk was there all day, and people saw it as they came in, and I did it for a couple of reasons. I did it as a message to our students and staff that if I'm telling you the school is safe, I'm not going to be hiding in my office in the back corner of the school. I'm going to be out front and center protecting you and making sure that I eyeball and talk to anybody that wants to come into the school along with the resource officer. And I think that put a lot of people at ease. I think they appreciated that. And I also meant it. If it's good enough for me to be here, I need to be out in the front lines. So to conclude the question, and I think the good news is they ended up, Interpol got involved. This is a good story, happy ending. They caught the person. It was a person in Canada making a threat here. They arrested that person. That day, I was able to go and spend the afternoon writing up a document to send to parents in relief saying, our police have done tremendous work working with international police. They've caught the person. It was no threat. It wasn't someone local. Problem taken care of. I mean, I got a lot of hugs that day from parents and kids that were relieved. They were happy how we handled it. But I got to tell you, it was tense for me all day, just not knowing 100% in this day and age. But I had faith that we were making the right decision. And in retrospect, the question was, would I do it again? 100%. And I think those are difficult decisions as superintendent that I will need to make, and I'm willing to do. And I have to be able to go to bed at night knowing that I'm doing what's best for our children. In my other personal philosophy, if they were my own children, would I have sent them to school that day? And if the answer was no, then I would have had to cancel school. That's kind of my thought process behind that, how my superintendent let me handle that, how he worked with me, and how I would work with our principals in supporting them in some very difficult decisions that we make in this day and age.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Bill, like a lot of successful school systems dealing with MCAS and MCAS scores, we struggle to make some improvements in certain areas because we're at such a high level, and getting all the way to the top is always difficult. What are your strategies for those and those issues? And one of our areas that we struggle with is our special education kids, and what are your theories and practices in that regard?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike. And you guys are in a tougher situation than us because you're so close to the top, and it's hard to improve on that. But it's proven that always should be the goal. And I think the first thing, and you nailed it, was you got to break down your data. I do like the new accountability system, how it breaks it down into attendance, into lowest performing students, special education, students of color. I put up in my blog post a comprehensive breakdown this year, the first time we've done it, of every single data point on all the accountability data. I would do the same and ask our principals to do the same at each of our schools. So that's where you find where you can do better. When you break out all the subgroups, and you find out where you're not improving. We found the same thing. Our special education population was underachieving, and some of our socioeconomic and EL students were not succeeding at the highest rate or proportionally to our other students. So we attacked the problem there. And the example I give you is that's where our Jossam hour, and I was hoping I could get to this idea came from, and it was the teacher's idea. we put together a committee that said, okay, we've got a problem with our MCAS scores in these particular groups. How are we going to solve this? And then the kids weren't, we felt our curriculum was pretty strong. We had good supports in place. We improved those, obviously. We were understaffed in our EL program. The data showed us that. We hired a new teacher and diversified the group of students that were coming in. We were able to do that better. So those are some immediate low-hanging fruit that we were able to do just by the data there. And those numbers are already improving. And the final thing was, how do we help all students succeed while also bringing up those students that were lowest achieving in our school? And we came up with the opportunity, and I think I'm a big fan of Richard Dufour's work, highly successful school principal and superintendent, who had the belief that if you're going to support kids, you have to do it during the school day. You can't do it after school. And for example, we tell kids that are failing math or that are miserable in their math class because they're not doing well to stay after an hour in math. And they don't show up. And we wonder why. Where you should be having that intervention during the school day where you have them captive audience and where it's on their level and it's with a smaller group of people and it's more attention to detail and it's more at their specific need. And we've accomplished that at Monomoy with something called the Jossam Hour, where we went from 3 lunches and to 1 lunch and 700 kids. And what the concept is that we have a schedule within a schedule. And kids go on their software, and there's a lot of freedom in this. Now, if you're a high-flying student in good standing and you're meeting all your expectations, you can choose some enrichment opportunities. So it's a nice stress breaker for those kids that are taking 3 APs to go and meet with their friends and have a study group. Or if I'm stressed out that I've got band practice after school or athletics, I can go and do a work study with one of my teachers during that time. So there's a lot of options for kids. The other thing it did was allow us to support those struggling kids that we have identified and that all schools identified by having extra help during that. So, Mike, can you still hear me?
I can hear you. I lost my video, but I can hear you.
Okay, that's important. Thank you. So I'll continue. So what happens with those kids in needs now, teachers can go into the kids' schedule and schedule them to come meet with them on their specific topic of need. So for example, if I'm struggling in math, we call it academic overtime. During that lunch block, I'll eat my lunch first half, and then I'll go meet with my math teacher with 3 or 4 other kids in a small group, and I'll get some individualized attention from that teacher. So we've moved the model from after school to during school. We've done it within the school day, and we didn't sacrifice any learning time because we just got smart about our schedule. We were having 3 lunches, 5-minute passing time in between. We just got rid of the passing time. We saved 15 minutes right there. And then we shortened the kids' passing time from 5 minutes to 4 minutes. And then typically, especially at the high school level, that would be the entity to try to shorten their transition time. But they loved the Jossam experience so much, they were willing to give that passing time up because they were able to recover that social time during Jossam. And I'll end with this. It was one of the best things we did for our social emotional learning and our students with high anxiety. Those kids in our schools that eat under the stairwell or hide in the bathrooms or have to go to guidance because they don't like big crowds, or that they don't have a friend in that first lunch because of the schedule. And so we were able to provide this one opportunity where now we could connect kids with their friends socially. They could eat together, they could connect together, and they could see social groups that they wanted to be with. So we were allowed to capture all of that. And we've had many schools come down and look at our model. And again, it wouldn't be something I would come in and say, we're doing this. It would be me coming in and just sharing what I'm sharing with you, with our faculty and staff, and saying, hey, what do you think? Is that something that would leverage helping our kids that need it the most without sacrificing anything else, just by being a little more creative in our scheduling, and then let them come up with how it would look if they agreed to it in Scituate?
Great, that's great, thank you.
Sorry, interruption by children. So speaking of children and things like that, so and parents, so how do you, we have a lot of very dedicated parents that care very much about our district, of course, and are highly involved. And, you know, we want to make sure that our information flows really well in and out so that it's accurate. Given social media and just how quickly things change, how do you facilitate the flow of ideas and the critical feedback from parents and other citizens and folks in the district?
Well, I think the first thing I did, and I talk about this in my entry plan in a little circle bubble there, is I think you have to have regular weekly communication from the superintendent's office. I think that sets the tone for the district. I think part of that would allow me as superintendent to get my message out to the greater community in a digital newsletter. We could push that out through all the forms of social media, Instagram, Facebook, all the groups, local groups. We have one now, and I share it with over 600 people, town folks, community members, select boards, everybody. Because if you don't tell your story, somebody else will. So I think that a weekly newsletter, digital newsletter, telling all the great things, and that's our philosophy in Monomoy, and that would be my philosophy there. This newsletter is going to be getting out accurate, important information, but also to brag about the great things happening about our schools, because not everybody knows it. And they need to know that, so when it comes to be supporting the budget, they'll know exactly what your schools are doing. So I think that would come from me. I would ask that each school feed me information, and we could collaborate in that into one point from the district that would come out, and each school would have a space in that newsletter. So I think that would be uniform instead of sending out a bunch of different things where people get overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. That would be my recommendation. And I think we all, and I know by researching your schools, all your schools have so many things to brag about, that we get that information out there, and that not only do we blast it out to parents, but we blast it out to community members. And one more example I can give, we were going through our second year, a really tough budget time. And there was a group of adamant community group on Facebook that were, pushing back. And yeah, the gift of Facebook, isn't it wonderful? So, I proactively reached out to the leader of that group, and I hadn't known that person. Just said, "Can I start sharing my Friday Focus?" I call it the Friday Focus with you, our newsletter. I really want you all to know what we're doing here. We're doing some really special things here. And she said, "Absolutely." And I started pushing that out. And a year or two later, she got back to me and said that was one of the biggest influences on that group of supporting some of the things coming from our schools, because not everybody knows what's happening in our schools every day. And a lot of times, if we wait for the media to report it, it's usually something bad, or it's something they pick apart in your MCAS scores. I remember hiding into my desk every November or whatever the MCAS scores come out, wondering, oh, where are they going to get me on this year in MCAS? Am I going to have a job? So I said, to heck with this. Every week, we are going to brag about our school. We're going to be transparent. We're going to be out there and in front of it. And it's been one of the best things. It gets read by 600 to 1,000 people every week. And it's probably the single best thing we've done for communication. And I would do the same if I came there, is try to consolidate that into one thing and then push it out through all the different media where people are accessing it through social media.
That's great. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right. Continuing the theme, you answered all my questions, so I'm going to go to my supplemental ones here. It's twofold. I think they're kind of fun ones. The first one is, do you think that in uncertain weather events, school should be canceled the night before or the morning of? And as Scituate's a coastal community, we obviously have challenges that other communities do not. Perhaps they are similar to Monomoy region. But what's your experiences in terms of ocean storms and so on that have impacted student learning?
No, it's a great question, Peter. And it's funny because I was reading where Superintendent Griffin had mentioned that the hardest part, I think it was after his first year, was the weather. And he had a weather chart on his desk or something. I just thought that was real in predicting the weather and that kind of stuff. And I used to dread it as an athletic director. And in Cape Cod, the difference is extremely different than where I live in Plymouth. And that may be the case if I were to get this job. That's why I was, contemplating if to get the job to eventually live there, because I think that's a very important decision. I think a superintendent can never really, it's like being an umpire. No matter what decision you make, you're going to upset somebody. But I think you have to do it with the safety of kids at mind, and you have to do it in conjunction with the facilities, the town facilities people, and get as much information. Other superintendents who I have in your area with Mr. Sullivan of Cohasset, Dr. Sullivan of Cohasset, and Jeff Granatino of Marshfield, I would count on calling and talking to them. Hey, what are we doing? We're all in the general area. What are you seeing? I think that all happens. I think it would depend on the situation. I think the earlier the better. obviously, so people could prepare. It's tough for people at 6 in the morning, 6:30 in the morning to get the call. And now if I'm working in Boston, what am I going to do? Who's going to take care of my child? So I think you have to balance safety first, and number two, getting the message out as early as possible. And I'd rather err on the side of caution that if there was a coastal storm and, you know, I'm waiting as long as I can and it looks like it's going to hit us and it's 100% from the forecasters and it's already showing signs of that, and I can call the night before and then all of a sudden the sun comes out the next day. You know what? We can make it up in June on a sunny day, but we didn't risk kids' lives or we didn't risk any accidents or things like that, because we also have to consider that there's older kids driving to school. So all those things would be on my mind before I made that decision, and I would have to balance the two.
All right, fair enough. And what kind of weather events do you have in the Cape? Are there ocean impacts that impact bus routes and things like that, or is that not?
Not to the same degree, but yes, I think we'll have a lot of like, you know, winds that will knock out power and that type of things, heavy windstorms and sleet storms, but not typically flooding and that thing. That, although at some homes may get that, not typically across the board. We're probably more traditional in the respect that there's snow or you know, flooding of certain areas with wind or hurricane type of things.
Sure, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Bill, last year we, as a school committee, looked at the school start times for the schools in our district. So currently our middle school and high school start earlier, and then our elementary school start about 40 minutes later. There's a large amount of medical research that supports later start times for middle school, high school students as part of their growth. Have you had to do any research or review on the start times in Monomoy based on this information? If yes, what was the outcome and why? And if no, what would be your approach to review this issue?
Thank you. And I have looked at your start times and I saw that process go, and I know you moved them. And I think that was a good idea. Yeah, actually, we went through the same process, and we were one of the first schools on Cape Cod to do it. We flipped our start times. We start, you know, really late. Our high school starts at 8:45 a.m. Middle school starts at 8:45 a.m. as well. And because the research shows, I think 8:30 as the ideal time for the older kids. And where the younger kids, it shows they should be going to school early and they're falling asleep, needing naps at about 3 o'clock, 2:30. So we had it backwards. So we flipped those. But the process was, it's very controversial. It's very, it hits close to home. So I think we did a real good job on, like you mentioned, Mike, doing the research on it, presenting the research, having a lot of conversations with parents, hearing their concerns. You know, daycare came up a lot, or if we had a high school student that was getting home later than the younger elementary student who was actually watching them, how that would work. Sports came into it. We always kept going back on, I mean, the research is so shockingly clear that how can we not listen to this and do this? And we presented that data, and ultimately, although it wasn't 100% consensus from our community, there was a strong approval from it. And I think that's the way I would approach it too, is that you need to do your homework. You need to go out and talk to people, get the feedback, present your plan, and then ultimately stand by it if it's good for kids. And we believed it was, and we're seeing the results of that. A lot of it is just, you know, not only in the data, we're collecting that still, but I think just the anecdotal stuff of, you know, our kids coming in and just saying, you know, because the kids were kind of split on it too. When the kids started, you know, getting used to it, they were saying it was really good for them because they were able to sleep in, or if they were early birds, they can come into school. We open the school early. They could do their homework and things like that. It didn't impact the sports as like everybody thinks, because we work with the league and they work with us. So that wasn't a problem. So I think all the anticipated problems didn't exist, but we're also proactive. And, for example, with, you know, elementary parents, drop-off times. We ended up starting some daycare situations to support them. So we listened and heard that, wow, I have to work in, again, I'll use Boston as an example. I have to drop my kid off. Now you're starting my elementary school 30 minutes earlier. What am I going to do? Okay, we'll start a daycare, or we'll start some clubs and activities. What we did at the middle school is we opened the school at, an hour early and started and did a lot of our clubs and activities before school instead of after school. And we had kids getting dropped off and participating. We also sent our high school National Honor Society kids down and started homework help and mentoring for our middle school kids before school. to help those students. So I think it was a team effort. So we got real creative in supporting those parents that were concerned, that had valid reasons. And the ones that weren't so valid, like sports not being able to get played and stuff like that, we had a plan for that, and we were able to adjust schedule where those didn't materialize. So I think it's been successful for us.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Bill, I have the last question. How would you address the lack of diversity in Scituate Public Schools?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I'm we are 20% of our kids are kids of color, so we don't have that problem. We have a very diverse group. It could even be more diverse. It's growing, and it's been really good. Our home away from home culture has really been wonderful for that. I think we start by strengthening the MEDCO program, and I know that was a budget item on your budget. I know that was a question, you know, in the first round, and I know that was a commitment to some of the budget money to improving some busing and transportation. I think I would start by making the program we have, the MEDCO program, stronger. And so the best advertising is word of mouth. So those students that are in our MEDCO program, instead of saying, those are the MEDCO kids, no, those are the We Are crew. Those are the sailors. That vernacular has to change. And how do we do that? We start off by listening to them. You know, I have, again, back to my involvement with kids, and I would certainly sit down with our students in the MEDCO program and have a round table and meet regularly with them and say, hey, how are things for you? How can we serve you better? Do you feel part of this family here? Why or why not? What can we change? Get them and their parents involved. And I think one thing that learning a little bit more and more about MEDCO is that, you know, these kids have a long commute. It's a long day. And so they're getting deprived of some of the opportunities that are possibly happening after school and in the evening because of that, you know, commute and stuff. So I think making that parent partnership with the Scituate parents and making some kind of a contact where, you know, almost like a student that's coming from another country coming over to live in, who can you go and stay with after school or sleep over or whatever it is? What parent can we connect you with? And I think we have to check up regularly with those students to make them part of the community. I think if you build strong MEDCO program where that becomes the norm, that they're just our sailors, we are crew. You know, it's all about mutual trust and respect for all. If they feel valued and involved, and their parents do, we find a way to do that, and also find a way to learn from them, because that's the whole concept of the program, is that we learn from diversity. Because we want our Scituate kids to go out there, and when they go out into the real world, it's very different than what it looks like maybe in Scituate, right? And maybe in Monomoy. So how can we do that? I also think, and I'll end with it, it involves training for our staff. Because as a white man, I grew up, you know, in a white family, obviously. I don't know the struggles of people of color. All right, so I need to be educated on that. I need to learn that. And so does our staff, because we're coming at it, and everyone has self-biases. So I think this year we're doing this in Monomoy. We're having professional development. I learned a ton. I think it sends a good message to our students that we're trying to learn and that we want to get better and we want to support them. I think that, combined with a thriving school culture where every single child is treated like they were your own and valued and respected, sets up a significant way to encourage more students of color to want to come to your school. And then we can start talking about expanding the MEDCO program and maybe even getting some students more students of color to move into the town. So that would be my approach.
Great, thank you. So now, you know, the questions have concluded, so we give you the opportunity to make a closing statement or ask questions of us.
All right. Again, from your questions, a lot of my questions were answered, so I know I kind of get a feel for where you're coming from and what your values are. So I appreciate that. So I probably have 1,000 questions, just so you know, if I were to get the job. So I'll save them for that. But tonight I just want to end with, again, it was great talking with you all. You're like celebrities. I watch you on TV. Now I get to meet you all. But I think you get a good team there. You get a nice rapport. You get a nice rapport, and I'd love to be part of it. I think what I bring to the table is stability. If you look at my resume, I commit to seeing projects through. I've been here 6 years at Monomoy. I can stay and retire here. And the best time to look for a good job is when you got a great one. So it's a win-win for me. I love where I am. I'm ready to move on and grow in my career. But I wasn't able to do that till I knew Monomoy was in a good place. And it took me 5 years. And I think that's going to be the same. There's a lot of similarities with what I see in Scituate with all those opportunities that attracted me initially to that. But only job I applied for, I want to come there for as long as you'll have me. And I think once you get to know me and my work ethic and how I bring people together and how organized I am, I think you're going to keep me around. And just a couple of examples of seeing things through. In Plymouth, a while back, I was the athletic director. I was there for over a decade, my hometown. And we had a building project during that time. And I had some opportunities because the next step in my progression was assistant principal. I had some opportunities to leave, but I stuck around because we were in the middle of a building project. And I was called on to be the architect of the turf fields. They were going to go grass initially, and this was about 15 years ago. And I did the research on it, and I said, it's not prudent, it's not fiscally responsible to put in grass, pay for the irrigation, pay for the seeding and the cost of that when you can invest in turf fields on a smaller footprint. We were able to do that. And then, to be honest with you, that's the easy part. The harder part is to ensuring once those fields are built and those schools are built, that they're maximized with efficiency, they're maximized to what the vision was, which is student and community use. So I stuck around after that and built a strong relationship with our recreation department and director of recreation to ensure that those fields were full and being used every day, all day by our students and our community. And we worked together to work out a fee or get rid of the fee structure, if you will, so that we weren't just exchanging checks, that we were actually letting kids from both groups, the community groups and the students in our school, use it equitably. So I think that speaks to my relationship building and my ability to see things through. The next obvious one is my 6 years in Monomoy, where I started something once in a lifetime opportunity. How many people get to start a school from scratch? It's something you dream of. It was my dream job. We're really hitting on all cylinders. I think my superintendent can share with you on my accomplishments there. And certainly it's a we game. I like to use the word we and us and not I and me, because it's never me. It's always us. And I think we've accomplished that at Monomoy. It's in a real good place. The sign of a great leader is when you leave, the show goes on and people step in and take your place. And I think we're ready at Monomoy to do that. I have the support of my superintendent and my community to move on with my career, my growth. And I would really love it to be at Scituate. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank
Good night.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
Bill.
Thanks, Whitney. Good night.
Meet you all. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.